Remember, remember the 5th of November, Gunpowder Treason and Plot. It is Mr. C here, and here we are on a journey for the Gunpowder Plot. What was it? Who was involved? Did it actually happen? Let's go on a little tour around the central London to see what that was all about. I am walking now along the Strand, right through the centre of London, a very famous road that would have had the Thames on one side and the city here. And it is said here that in a pub called the Duck and Drake that the conspirators for the Gunpowder Plot met. 13 conspirators led by Robert Catesby. What did they want? They wanted to get rid of the hated King James I. He had been come to the throne in 1603 after Elizabeth I had died, ending the Tudor reign because she had no children. James's mother was Mary, Queen of Scots, and she, of course, had been Catholic. But James had been brought up Protestant and had brought in more Protestant reforms. The Catholics did not like this. They had hoped that with the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, coming back to the throne, they would have had a bit more concessions and more freedoms, but no. James said he was going to have double down on it and be more and more Protestant, which ultimately meant that these Catholic conspirators wanted his death. Now, I think all of that is true, but the thing about the Duck and Drake, and this is my theme going to be for this video a little bit, is I am casting quite a bit of doubt on the Gunpowder Plot. Many of the facts that we seem to know about the Gunpowder Plot are a bit iffy because there is why would the conspirators meet in a pub on the Strand where all of the king's spies could hear them? Surely they'd meet in a private home somewhere. Okay, admittedly, yes, the secrets of the plot did get out, so maybe they were that foolish to meet in a pub. But I'm not ultimately sure because it got quite far, this conspiracy. And also, why have so many people? Why have 13? Surely this could be done in a smaller bit. Anyway, one of those 13, of course, was Guy Fawkes. More on him now. Well, the conspirators hired a man called Guy Fawkes, who came from Yorkshire, and he spent a lot of time working in the wars of Spain and France, and he was the gunpowder man. He was good at explosives. They hired him in to get a lot of explosives. Indeed, he managed to get hold of 36 barrels of explosives. But where was he going to put it? Well, it was here in Westminster. Westminster is very different to today, except for you can just about see Westminster Hall here. Westminster Hall is the oldest part of the Palace of Westminster. The roof in there is from the 13th century, and that is indeed where underneath that building was where this Gunpowder Plot came about. Where exactly? Well, it was called the Undercroft, and Westminster at the time was a warren of all different places that you could do. Just to the other side of it is the river, and people would be able to come into the river, load up a few barrels or whatever the case might be, and hide it in the Undercroft. This would mean, therefore, that Guy Fawkes just trundling a few barrels of gunpowder underneath it would be fine. What was the plan? Well, the state opening of Parliament was going to take place with the King. James I was going to open Parliament. Now, usually this actually happens in the summer, but there was a plague on in London, so they decided to prolong it until October. And actually, the King, James, was off hunting in the countryside, and he decided he got a bit lazy, really, and liked his hunting. So it was delayed all the way to the 5th of November. That was a problem for the conspirators because it meant that they had to delay various things. They had to get help from other people, and crucially, it meant that his gunpowder went off. So Guy Fawkes had to go and get more gunpowder, by which time the plot was sort of unraveling. But what do they want to do? The king was going to be there with all the lords, and they would have quite literally blown it up. This whole building would have gone off like that, and that would have been the end of James and his persecution of the Catholics. But as I said, things went a bit awry. On the 26th of October, a very interesting twist in the tale of the Gunpowder Plot takes place here in Hoxton on Crondall Street, specifically at the home of William Parker, Lord Monteagle. Lord Monteagle was a prominent Catholic, but he was due to be at the House of Lords for the state opening of Parliament. Now, what was interesting is he was having a rather nice lavish dinner party at his palace here, or his manor house here in Hoxton, and an anonymous person gave him a letter in the street, and in this letter it said, "Do not attend the state opening of Parliament because it is going to be blown up." All very mysterious. He didn't know quite what to do, so what he did is he rushed down to Whitehall, to the centre of London, to deliver it to the King's man-in-waiting, Robert Cecil. And we'll learn more about that in a minute. But there is actually a little memorial here, a little plaque to this event for Lord Monteagle, but it is a rubbish plaque. It's one of the worst I've seen, really. I mean, it's so small, and you can barely read it. And they also get the date wrong. They put the 12th of October. It definitely was the 26th, according to the Parliament's archives. Anyway, the letter to Lord Monteagle also still exists. It's in the National Archives. I think they sometimes wheel it out for exhibitions and something like that. But why was Lord Monteagle warned? Well, he, as I say, he was a prominent Catholic, and it looks as if one of the conspirators, who of course all were Catholic, was potentially either related to him or maybe knew him as a friend and wanted to tip him off. But the problem was Monteagle took it to the king. Lord Monteagle got that letter. He got on his horse and he rode from Hoxton right down here to Whitehall or to Westminster. But on the way, he was intercepted and he gave the letter to Robert Cecil, the king's right-hand man. And Robert Cecil ordered for Westminster to be searched, and incredibly, they went down there to the Undercroft and they found Guy Fawkes. They said to him, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Oh, I'm just inspecting these sort of barrels. They're all okay. Don't worry about them." They said, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name's John Johnson." They described him as a dodgy-looking bloke in the language of the time, and they let him on his way extraordinarily. But even more extraordinarily, that was on the 4th of November. In the evening, Guy Fawkes goes back. Why would he go back? He'd already think he's been rumbled, but he goes back. And sure enough, they find him again in there, and this time they arrest him. And they send him off to the Tower, and a huge flight takes place with Catesby, etc., etc. Here at the Ashmolean, you can actually see the very lantern that Guy Fawkes was apparently carrying. It was donated to the University of Oxford by one of the people who found him in the Undercroft, and there it is. You can actually see something that Guy Fawkes was touching. Behind me, of course, is the much fabled Tower of London, where much of Britain's history has taken place. But for us, this was where Guy Fawkes was taken after he had been found in the Undercroft over by Westminster. Now, what did he do? Well, they tortured him. They tortured him. Probably put him on the rack, this big piece of table where you tied one arm here and there and your legs, and you were stretched. And at first he was adamant his name was John Johnson. He had nothing to do with him, but eventually it was beaten out of him, tortured out of him, and he gave up his real name, Guido Forks, and he also gave up the names of his co-conspirators. Now, in the National Archives, they sometimes have on display a little piece of paper with his tortured signature signed on his confession, and it's barely legible, and it's clearly a man who's been horrendously tortured has given this confession. And so that was the end of him. He was eventually obviously put on trial more very quickly, and he was dragged back to Westminster, where he was hanged, drawn and quartered. His co-conspirators put up a good fight. They fled to the Midlands near Birmingham, Warwickshire. Eventually they were caught up, and they were executed, and that was the end of the Gunpowder Plot for poor old Guido. Now, I've been reflecting, and this is perhaps a good place to end and stop and think about the Gunpowder Plot, but I've been reflecting on it, and this idea that how much of this actually happened, how much of this is true, because the main sources of information come from the torture. We've seen here Guy Fawkes and Guido being tortured, and as we know, we can't really take anything valuable from anybody who's been tortured. They'll say anything to stop it. The other thing, also, many of the information comes from the government themselves, Robert Cecil themselves, and they had a real ulterior motive. For them, this suits them fantastically well, to have some Catholics to blame so that they can push forward their oppression and finally push the Catholics out and solve that Catholic problem once and for all. So, how much is this true? Because there's some really dodgy details when you look into it. 36 barrels of gunpowder. There is no way you need that amount of gunpowder. That's a ludicrous amount. Why all this last minute stuff? They go down there, they find them, they don't arrest them, they come back again. All a bit odd to me. Who sent the letter to Monteagle? How suddenly we know this? Why meet in a pub? There's just too many holes in this for me to really be a full thing. And I think the really final thing to reflect on is when we do bonfire night, we set off fireworks, etc., what are we actually celebrating? Are we celebrating the death of a Catholic? Are we celebrating the foiling of a plot to kill the king? Or are we celebrating a democratic hero who was trying to fight off the evil tyranny of a king? And I would say that probably Guy Fawkes is more well known now than James I has ever been. So perhaps Guy Fawkes has the last laugh. I hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you come and see the sites of Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot in London. And most importantly, of course, make sure you subscribe and also have a wonderful bonfire night.